Welcome, folks. As folks are trickling in, I just want to welcome you all here. If you are in need of or would like to have closed captioning available, we have enabled the Zoom transcriptions. So you can go ahead and click on the bottom of your options, and there should be one to enable your transcriptions and closed captioning if you'd like that. So we're going to give it just a minute or so, and then we'll dive right in. All right, I'll let folks continue to trickle on in, but I want to be mindful of everyone's time, and we've got lots to talk about today. My name is Annabelle Olenko. I am the past Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee Chair for the National Science Policy Network, and I'm so happy to have you all here to kick off and continue our conversations around advancing the diversity, equity, and inclusion through our professional societies. We have two wonderful panelists here, and it's going to be moderated by one of our own NSPN members. We couldn't do this work without our partners, the Union of Concerned Scientists. So while folks are coming in, I want to give a brief overview of both organizations before we hand it off and kick it off for the official webinar. So if I can go back a few slides, because I didn't realize I was in the middle of it. But the National Science Policy Network, or NSPN, is an organization built by and for early career STEM professionals and engaging in training in science advocacy and policy. We have specific areas where we train, particularly if you're interested in things like diplomacy, DEI work, as many of you I'm sure are here today for. We have folks all over the United States, but we also have membership across the world internationally, and we may even have some international attendees today. So thank you all for your time and your energy here today. So that's a little bit about NSPN. You'll learn more about us towards the end, but I want to go ahead and hand it off to my collaborator, Melissa Varga.
Thanks, Annabelle. Hi, all. My name is Melissa Varga. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Science Network Community and Partnerships Manager at the Union of Concerned Scientists. And I'm so glad that you've joined us today for this continuing discussion on what it looks like to prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion within science organizations. I want to acknowledge that systemic racism has fundamentally shaped our institutions, including science organizations, to consciously and unconsciously uphold white supremacy. And that includes the Union of Concerned Scientists. UCS is on an ongoing journey to become a more inclusive and anti-racist organization. And what I've learned from doing this work is that it is difficult, it takes time, and that you need to focus on both the internal and external changes in order to make progress. We at UCS are not experts on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but that is no excuse not to do the work. So we are trying to do the work, and we look to other experts to help us, and we look to our partners and others in this space to see what we can learn from them, what has worked for them, and what they wish they had done differently. We all have a role to play in changing our institutions, whether we are staff, members, or partners. So I'm excited that all of us here today have a chance to learn from these 2 case studies as a way to continue learning about new approaches that we can take to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion within the science community. Thanks all.
All right. And without further ado, I want to introduce our moderator for this session. Ranjini Bhattacharya is a PhD student in the Integrated Mathematical Oncology Department at Moffitt Cancer Center. She is interested in applying interdisciplinary science to understand cancer evolution and improve patient health and healthcare. She completed her Bachelor of Science in Biotechnology with a minor in physics from India, and we're happy to have her lead some of the conversation today. So Ranjini, please go ahead and take it away.
So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are on the globe. I'm so glad to be here and to take forward this discussion on how to improve DEI endeavors in societies and institutions. I hope you've all been having a wonderful day, and we hope to add a little bit of more awesomeness to your day with this discussion. So I'll kick this off by introducing our panelists. So today we have Dr. Margaret Fraser and Dr. David Schiffman. Dr. Fraser is a Director of Diversity and Inclusion at AGU. In this role, Dr. Fraser works with AGU volunteer leaders and staff to develop and oversee the implementation of DEI-related programs and events. She received a BS degree in geology from the University of Georgia and an MS and PhD in geological sciences from the University of Southern California. Dr. Schiffman, he is a marine biologist specializing in interdisciplinary conservation. He is the lead author of a new study examining the role of professional scientific societies in creating and solving DEI problems, looking at the American Elasmobranch Society as a case study. And he also has a very cool Twitter handle, Why Sharks Matter. So go check him out. So now I'll hand over the mic to Dr. Margaret Fraser and to kickstart the panel discussion.
Great, thank you, Ranjini. Let me share my slides. Okay, can everybody see my slides? I hope can you give me a thumbs up or a great? Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So hey, everybody, thank you so much for being here. I know we're still in a pandemic and we all have different pulls on our time and energy. So thank you. My name is Margaret Fraser. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'd like to give you a short review of AGU Landing, the Leadership Academy and Network for Diversity and Inclusion in Geosciences. This is one of AGU's newest initiatives to support an inclusive geosciences. So I need to give you a little bit about AGU. We are an international nonprofit association supporting an inclusive community of about 130,000 Earth and space scientists and partners dedicated to discovery and to solutions to societal challenges. Our mission is to advance discovery and solution science. We also grow the exchange of scientific knowledge, and we promote excellence in scientific research. And in the yellow down here, these are just some of the departments and programs that we have at AGU dedicated to each of these missions. So AGU has a history and a deep foundation for promoting and supporting ethics and inclusion. One of the 3 strategic goals for AGU is to promote and exemplify an inclusive scientific culture. Diversity and inclusion are recognized and celebrated as being essential for the success of AGU, its members, and the global Earth and space science enterprise. But there remains what is called geosciences whiteness problem in the US. And this is what was the impetus for the AGU landing project. The data shown here are from the US, but the trends are similar across the global north. The whiteness problem refers to the fact that persons identifying as white comprise the majority of undergraduate bachelor's and PhD recipients. These proportions do not reflect the population at large, and the proportions are even lower for women who do not identify as white. And these trends are also true for geosciences and allied disciplines in the earth and space sciences. So the lack of significant progress broadening participation in geosciences suggests that there are barriers that are foundational, systemic, and institutionalized across the earth and space sciences, and a cultural shift is needed. And so we created a model that is based and rooted in scholarship and research in social sciences and organizational sciences to affect change. And the 4 parts of our model are to leverage AGU's commitment to ethics and equity, as shown in the various D&I plan, the strategic plan, and the ethics guide. The second part of this model is to build earth and space scientists' capacity for DEI topics. The third part of this model is to provide networks of support from the curious to leaders in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then the fourth part of this model, or our strategies for change, is to promote visibility and recognition of DEI work and leaders. All of this is rooted in the literature. And so we took these 4 strategies and we proposed and are trying to implement this model that we call Landing, the Leadership Academy and Network for Diversity and Inclusion in the Geosciences. We are a group of scientists, social scientists, and DEI champions and leaders. And this is how we propose to affect culture change in the earth and space sciences. There are 2 primary components. The first is a community of practice to build networks within the AGU community and beyond, and an academy that will provide targeted professional development. And to lead our model, our plan based in research is to lead to a shift in a more inclusive earth and space sciences culture where all people feel safe and welcome to bring all aspects of themselves. So the first program that I'll talk a little bit about is Landing Academy. This is a 2-year cohort-based professional development for leaders in geosciences, and they also will implement a broadening participation project. We are in the very first year of Landing Academy, and we have created and facilitated curricula on diversity, equity, and inclusion foundations, individual and systemic bias, mentoring, just to name a few. We held the first summit, so this multi-day meeting for the Academy. Over 3 days, there were presentations and activities from experts. There were networking opportunities between fellows, and there was space to solicit advice on their projects. So what the Academy fellows do is they take what they have learned during the Academy material, and they take it back to their institution and they try to implement a project, all with the help of the facilitators and other fellows. So we have these big multi-day, we call them summits, every quarter. And then every month, we also have virtual meetings. These are about 3 hours in length, additional professional development on topics. And so these are just some of the multiple experts we've had speak and some of the topics that we have had discussed. And then this graphic illustrates how the Academy curriculum overlaps with the Academy Fellows development and their implementation of their broadening participation leadership project. So that's just a very high level view of the Academy. I'd be glad to answer any questions later that you may have about it. But I want to move on to the community of practice. This is a registered access virtual platform of resources that creates virtual and in-person events to engage and support a broad community of current and aspiring DEI champions. Previous to this, there was no community to support DEI champions within the Earth and Space Sciences. We have a lot of features to the community of practice. We have a library with over 700 resources. We have a whole section on how to stay on top of language, diversity, equity, and inclusion language. Language is constantly changing and evolving, and this is our attempt to help people understand why and to stay on top of it. We also hold inclusive science webinars, and we provide the latest DEI scholarship. We also wanted to create programs at various career stages that build capacity for scientists to integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion into their science and to impact society across a variety of sectors. So the National Science Foundation has also funded this program, which is a postdoctoral research fellows program within Landing. And we've just gotten that off the ground. So I want to end with this because I realize I'm at my time, and it is based on my experiences. Professional societies are uniquely poised to change the culture of science. So I've got about 2 decades of experience as a university professor and as a program officer at the National Science Foundation, and AGU Landing is only possible with a professional society with the size and reach of AGU. And this is because of AGU's combination of our governing structure, the resources that we have, and our reach. So for example, the strategic plan created by the board and council, strong dedication to diversity, equity, and inclusion, including putting money towards those initiatives. We have various departments for communicating, marketing. We have a program manager, so we can do these bigger projects. And I want to end with this. We have been able to dedicate about 10 staff members at AGU to Landing. So about 3 of us are nearly full-time working on Landing. So in addition to this, we have a professional program evaluator and a professional program facilitator. So that's the high level. I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I'm looking forward to the next talk.
Thanks, Margaret. We will have time for question answers after both the talks. First, we'll have the moderator-led questions, and then we'll have time for the audience questions. So I'll go, and the stage is ready for David to take over. And then after that, you'll have time for further discussions.
Great. All right, are we successfully sharing the screen here? Can I get a thumbs up here? Okay, wonderful, thank you. I'm excited to talk with you today about our new paper about what professional societies can do with DEI issues using a case study of the American Elasmobranch Society. And Elasmobranch is a shark, skate, or ray. Ranjini valiantly pronounced that. That was great. And I want to tell you a little bit about sort of the background of this issue, and also to direct you to our paper for more information. So the paper is published open access in the journal Frontiers in Education. It was published a few weeks ago. I see our guest editor for that journal, who did a whole special issue on professional societies and DEI, is watching this webinar today. So hi, Veronica. So my field of shark, skate, and ray science as a subset of marine biology has major problems with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some of these problems have played out quite prominently in high-profile media outlets. Some of them are still part of the whisper network that you hear an awful lot about. Some things that fairly senior and high-profile members of my field have been accused of include sexism and sexual harassment, and worse, including some things that have happened at our annual conference, and horror stories that happen at our isolated field stations around the world and on research vessels, where it's harder for people to get away We also have issues with racism, ableism, colonial science and parachute science, homophobia and transphobia, just about anything you can imagine. And there's also a reputation in the field that things are run by the old boys network, the old boys club, that certain people can get away with just about anything because of who they are or because of who they're friends with. There have been at the American Elasmobranch Society conferences very, very public dismissal of these concerns by senior members of the society. There has been very nasty professional retaliation against early career members of the society who spoke out. So with that in mind, I want to introduce to you this project that we just got published, and also to briefly note that why I am here speaking and not one of my co-authors. It's as a white guy talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've heard for many years about how we need to help share the burdens. And also this was a very strategic decision, having me as lead author, as well as me being sort of the public face of this, because rightly or wrongly, some people listen more when I say it than when some of my colleagues say it. And we wanted to take advantage of that. So the goals of this paper and this project were threefold, which were to document demographic trends in our society's membership and leadership over time, to evaluate the success of our diversity initiative and propose actionable steps to improve it, and to generate a detailed, specific, evidence-based, best practice-inspired list of specific actions that the society can take to improve DEI issues, both within our conference, within our field, and within the society. So my co-author team includes 18 people who are current, former, and emerging leaders of the society from all career stages, including one former president. We had representation from relevant leadership committees on the society, but we also invited anyone who had ever been a vocal public critic of the problematic culture of shark science to join, and we invited colleagues who are thought leaders in improving DEI issues in STEM, regardless of whether or not they work specifically in shark world. And our author team represents multiple axes of diversity. We wanted to capture as many perspectives as we could, and I want to note that my role in this, other than just being the face of it and amplifying others' voices, was to be sort of the project manager and the synthesis writer type role. So any great ideas that you see in here come from my co-author team, and any errors are mine. So the rules of participating in this project were simple. Anyone who invited to participate could continue to say whatever they want about shark science and the society outside of participation in this project. And also we operated under a yes and principle, where no co-author could tell another, I don't think that problem matters and I don't think we should talk about it, or I don't like that solution and I don't think we can talk about it. People were able to suggest alternative phrasings of things, but were not able to shoot down anyone's ideas or concerns. So our society began collecting voluntary demographic data from all of our members in 2019, and we compared this with the NSF survey of the US scientific and engineering workforce and on related data from the general population of the United States. And we additionally got the names of all major leadership positions in the society throughout our history. The society was founded in the 1980s, and obtained demographic information for those names. So our members are overwhelmingly or are significantly more female than male, and we have a higher percentage of female members than the US scientific workforce or the US population as a whole. However, most of this gender diversity is at the early career graduate student level. Once you get into senior tenured level faculty, we just this year got to the point where we couldn't count the women who have tenure on one hand. And also we have significant underrepresentation of trans and non-binary members. In terms of racial and ethnic diversity, we are significantly underrepresented in membership of several racial and ethnic groups, and we have a significantly higher proportion of white members than the US scientific population or the US scientific workforce. I want to note here that there's a new organization, new in the last couple of years, called Minorities in Shark Sciences, that focuses on women and gender minorities of color interested in this field. And they have more members than the American Elasmobranch Society does. So perhaps the problem is not that these people are not out there, but it's that they are not joining or not remaining in the Elasmobranch Society. And in terms of leadership, for much of the start of the society, we were led overwhelmingly by white presenting males. In recent years, especially since about 2010, there's been a higher percentage of women in power, though it's still overwhelmingly white presenting members in power. Part of this has to do with the same people serving multiple leadership roles over time. We've still had very few women presidents. We have our second woman president right now. And we have notable issues with our leadership nomination process. We are aware of members of color who have been nominated for high-profile leadership positions, were approached by the nominating committee to say, if elected, would you serve? And they said yes. And then their names did not appear on the ballot, and no explanation was ever provided as to what happened there. We also operate a diversity scholarship for early career members from historically underrepresented groups that's been running for just under 10 years. And it provides free membership in the society, as well as specialized mentorship, professional networking, or professional development and networking to awardees. And we sent a voluntary survey to 104 alumni of the program and had about a 30% response rate, asking them what worked about the program and what needs to be improved. We had a lot of results here, but I'll just give you the quick summary in the interest of time. That alumni of the program reported that they had some, but generally limited professional benefits from participating in the program. Most of these were related to limited resources available to the program. For example, the program does not let people or give people travel funding to attend the conference. It just gives them membership in the society. And there were a lot of very specific and I think very, very reasonable and achievable solutions proposed. And finally, we had a list of suggestions of what AES can do to improve the problematic culture of shark science and our conference and our field. Suggestions come from published best practice guides, from written things from leaders in STEM DEI issues, and our 18 co-author teams' experiences with other professional societies who handle this better than we do. And we intentionally and strategically organized these into how easy they would be for AES to implement them. Some simply require our meeting manager to make sure we have a gender neutral bathroom or make sure we have vegetarian options available at the banquets. Some solutions simply require the president to say we're doing it. Some require a board of directors vote. Some require the full membership of the society to vote. And some require a major rethink of AES's role within the field of marine science and shark science specifically. For these, we propose a task force model where a variety of members spend a lot of time working on this and issue a report that would eventually lead to a membership vote. And we had a lot of solutions because we have a lot of problems. I encourage you to check out our paper for a full list. Just reading the bullet points of the solutions took more than my allotted 8 minutes here when I practiced it. So I will refer you to table 1 in our paper. It's a lot of stuff that most of you interested in this topic have thought of before. I imagine some stuff that you would find novel and useful. I want to thank the executive committee of the Elasmo Branch Society for supporting this. Thanks to some colleagues who contributed to early phases of the project. Thanks to the special issue at Frontiers in Education and our editor, Veronica Segara. Thanks to many of American Elasmo Branch Society members and people who left the society due to bad treatment they received there, who provided helpful feedback in shaping the scope of this paper. And I'll again remind you that this paper is available open access online as part of Frontiers in Education. And that is 8 minutes, so I'm going to stop right there.
Thanks, David. So the next 15 minutes will be a panel discussion and moderator-led questions. Meanwhile, I'd like to, encourage the audience to put in their questions in the Q&A. You can also submit anonymous questions, and we look forward to a great audience Q&A with the panelists. So I'll start with a question for Margaret. One of the goals for the Age Landing Academy is moving from DEI advocacy to DEI leadership. What does that look like for you?
That is such a good question. Thank you so much. We have conversations among the landing team all the time about what we mean by this. So when we are working on landing, we think of an advocate as someone who publicly voices support for something like a cause or a policy. And we think of a leader as someone who guides from the front line, actively leads work, either based on a position of authority or based on their experiences, their knowledges, or their training that can help them set the direction of the work. The reason why we want to do this is because we want to help DEI champions, so those who advocate, gain the knowledge and skills and therefore the confidence to develop projects and to get out front. So it's that, feeling like they have the base and the confidence to develop and implement new change. So hope that answers it.
Yes, for sure. David, and actually, Margaret, you can also pitch in on this, but the question is kind of inspired from the Frontiers paper that David talked about. So depending on the size and the composition of different societies, the actions and the steps one can take to improve inclusivity would change. So what are the different recommendations society members can show to support these type of changes, given what kind of group or institution they're part of?
Yeah, so a lot of the things that really need to be done are very, very expensive. And that's just not in the cards, at least for my small society that is still struggling from having to cancel our last 2 meetings. And we're still paying cancellation fees from the 2020 conference that we had to cancel due to COVID. So we just don't have tens of thousands of dollars for significant new training and resources. So that's why we wanted to include that stuff in our wish list in the paper, while noting that some stuff is easier to get than others. So it was how actionable is this was very much factored in to the structure of the paper. What can we do right now? What can we do this year if we work on it? What is a reasonable goal for the next 5 to 10 years? We also are working on obtaining external extramural funding to get some of these things. And we've just worked on clarifying the process for doing that under society bylaws to make sure all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed and no one's toes are stepped on. So there are lots of things that need to be done. Some of them don't cost anything at all. Some of them are just speaking up when someone says something problematic. Some of them are when you see someone retaliating against someone, tell them that's not okay. Some of them do require significant funding. So there's a full spectrum here.
Did you want me to take a stab at that too? Okay. I really like what David said. Absolutely. +1. I wanted to add that you need to work with others. You can't do the work alone. I have many stories that ended up with me dejected, jaded when I was a solo voice. Once leadership was engaged, we had a group of people, we got so much done.
Ranjini, you're muted.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, moving on to the next question. Margaret, this one's for you. So how do the landing leaders stay involved with AGU after the academy is over? And furthermore, how does the academy support their endeavors going forward, which may be beyond AGU and beyond the academy itself?
Awesome questions. Thank you. So we're still in the first year of the program. So it took us about 1.5 years to get it off the ground. We are in the first year of the academy. We launched the community of practice in March. So we're still very early. We're still trying to figure out what works, what we need to do differently, what we can do better. But going forward after the 2-year cohort, we know that we will meet with the fellows at AGU's fall meeting every year. There will be networking opportunities, mentoring, and proper mentoring for new academy fellows, new postdoc fellows is going to be part of that. We have a professional evaluator who is constantly interviewing and requesting information, and they will continue to do that after the 2-year cohort is up. And then I think the second part of your question is who's paying for this? How is this going to be sustainable? Such an important question. This was NSF funding, so it's a one is a 4-year award, another is a 3-year award. We have gone to AGU so many times and said, we need to pay people for the reviews that they're doing for our curricula. And because we are lucky enough to have a CEO and a board and a council who are so on board with this, they say, yes, absolutely. We just need to make the case. People need to be paid for the work that they are doing in this space. We're reaching out to private foundations for funds as well. So echoing what David said earlier, these things cost money, but you put your money where things are important to you. So yeah, hope that answers what you are asking.
Yeah, that's thank you. That's awesome. So now these are questions for the both of you, just like on, just DEI efforts and to encourage our attendees to, spearhead these efforts. So many of our folks are starting off their professional career and may not be, in a leadership position where they feel that they have agency to make their voice heard or make change in their own societies or institutions. How would you suggest the different ways that these attendees can take action? David, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I started leadership within the Elasma Branch Society as a master's student. So there are channels for that. Doing stuff doing change like this for large institutions requires people on the inside willing to help and people on the outside agitating and encouraging them to help. And there are important roles. Both of those are important roles. One may or may not fit your personal mindset better. I personally like being on the inside working for change that fits my just overall philosophy and theory of change better. But there'd be no political pressure to change if not for people not a part of the leadership team saying that we need to do better. So I recommend, if you're really concerned about not having agency and really concerned about pushback and stuff, maybe joining organizations or joining organizations that are pushing for change rather than using just your own voice, or finding allies that are already pushing for change and need more people to help them speak up. Because also, if you're earlier in your career, I know this was the case for me, I knew something was wrong and I knew things needed to be fixed, but I did not know the specific steps needed to take, or what a version that was not broken and problematic looked like. So being able to work with people who have that experience and have that institutional knowledge can be really, really helpful. But there are people who will tell you, don't say anything and don't speak out until you're advanced in your career and don't have tenure. Don't do that. That's no good.
Thank you, David. So +1 to what you said. I want to acknowledge that I think there's an unfounded expectation from people from marginalized groups to do this work. It's also emotionally exhausting. And so if you identify with a marginalized identity or identities and you don't feel like you have the energy to take on the work, don't. I've had colleagues tell me this. They're like, Margaret, this is important. I'm cheerleading for you, but I can't. So take care of yourself. I want to offer an encouraging word. Every little thing counts. So even if you're not, creating a curriculum or handing out millions of dollars to help people get through school, every little thing counts. It's additive. So if you don't feel safe or secure, there's ways to do it. So for example, you can volunteer to work for your department seminar series, and that's a way you get to invite people of various experiences and knowledges. Be the student or early faculty representative in different department meetings, university committees. There's ways you can increase inclusivity with your teaching, your syllabi, department awards. And again, I want to say, find your folks, find your people. You need networks of support and mentors for all aspects of yourselves, so personal and professional. And one thing that I have found that helped me was finding someone in leadership that I could trust and letting them know of my concerns. And then when I didn't hear anything, I followed up about my concerns. So it's very much people and relationships.
Thanks, Margaret. What a great message. Every bit counts, and start now rather than later. Thank you, David and Margaret. So now I'd like to move on to audience questions. So we have 3 questions in the Q&A, and for the audience, if they want to ask more questions, they can still put in some questions in the Q&A or the comment section. So I'll start with the first question. How are the societies helping bridge the systemic economic gap in the sciences? Like, you address the cost of attending conferences, unpaid internships, etc., but also for job pay, which is often low, especially for young professionals, and many can be discouraged or leave the field altogether. These economic burdens make science less accessible for many, and of course there are gender and racial disparities to all of this. So open to either of you, whoever would like to go first, take a stab at it. Margaret, would you like to go first?
Sure, I was. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic point and questions. So what AGU, so some of the things that AGU is doing is for our fall meeting and all of our meetings, actually, we provide a cost structure that differentiates between what tier country, this is based on the UN structure, not perfect, but it's that's a whole other conversation. But we do base it on, low income, low to middle income, high income countries. We offer free registration for certain, for some groups. So for example, Indigenous groups can attend our fall meeting for no cost. In terms of field year, so in Earth and Space Sciences, there, a lot of our work is field-based, and you can spend $300 on a pair of boots, and that is a huge barrier. And so that is something that we try to work with our different sections, D&I working groups, to talk about in their group how to implement in departments and say, hey, can the department buy a bunch of equipment and then you loan it out for field work or for field camps? So there's a lot of work to do, but I'm really happy that these conversations are happening.
Yeah, in the world of shark science, we are plagued with these unpaid internships, and even worse than that, with paid to participate internships. The most prestigious shark science field internship that you can get without a graduate degree, it will cost you about $2,000 a month to volunteer. And obviously, not everyone can afford that, and this has fairly major equity implications. But whenever you try to talk about it, people bite your head off. So this is one of the things that we proposed, that use that task force model, where lots of members of the society knowledgeable in something spend a lot of time working on it, issue a public report, and then later recommendations are discussed by the society. But it's a really big problem. And when my colleagues tell me, hey, there's no way we could do science if not for this pay to participate model, and I would say there's no way you can do this science in this way, which is not the same thing as there's no way you could do science. We all need to accept that we have a role to play in contributing to these problems. We all need to accept that we have a role to play in working to fix them. So there are, as far as some of the other parts of this question, my society is small. We do not have resources or connections or influence in things like salary across the field. We don't have anything like a certified member or whatever like that, or nothing union related. So I just wanted to comment on the unpaid and paid to participate internship model and just say it's a really big problem, and it is. I am optimistic that some people are starting to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for a young career scientist, being able to get paid for the efforts that they're putting in is really important to, like keep them motivated and, sustain their lives as well. This one's for David. Can you speak to the time and organization that was to come up with a list of recommendations, like the logistics, how many meetings, how long did it take, how did you coordinate, between different members who volunteered to help you with this, and how did your group get a buy-in given such bad behavior from the society in the past and possible professional repercussions?
Yeah, so this project took 2 years from when we first proposed it, first got our approval, our IRB approval to distribute surveys, to when it was officially published. So there was a lot of work, and trying to get 18 people based all over the world to find a Zoom time that they could all meet was impossible. So I did a lot of 3 or 4 meetings in a week, where people could pop in. We had we made an anonymous email where people could submit things and distributed that through society communications channels. So it's a lot of work to get all this. Then we met and sort of related recommendations. We sort of grouped together, making sure to being careful not to lose any of the nuance of anything. But no, if for example, recommendations of make sure there's vegetarian food available, make sure there's halal food available. We made that to make sure there's appropriate food available, for example, vegetarian and halal. So there were lots of decisions like that. In terms of buy-in, I don't know that we have it. We wanted to make this public list of recommendations and make sure that when people say, well, you're saying we need to fix it, what do we actually do? That we have a list of things that are what to actually do. But this paper is by no means stamped and endorsed by all of society leadership and senior members. This is an external group that worked on it, that came up with a list of recommendations that we are now working with leadership to try and enact. And I should note that I was not a member of leadership when we started working on this project. As of January of this year, I'm a member of the Elasmo Bank Society Board of Directors. That's why we submitted this paper on New Year's Eve at 10 p.m. But wanted to make sure that it was at least submitted before I had any official authority within the society as the lead author.
Thanks, David. And the final question from the audience, Margaret, you mentioned solo work in DEI can be very challenging and associated with burnout. How do you find initiatives to be a part of or start building a team?
Yeah, thank you for that, Tristan. So I guess the first step is, if you're a member of a professional society, see if they have a diversity and inclusion or an ethics and equity committee. See how you can be a part of that. See if there's a friendly ear to do that. And let's see, I'm going back to the question to make sure I'm answering. To find initiatives to be a part of. A lot of times, you can go to websites. Honestly, a lot of it comes from just, you notice something that's cringy or offensive or terrible, and you mention that to someone and they go, oh my gosh, you are right. And then it snowballs from there. You can always, I'm thinking of, you can, come to AGU, but we're Earth and Space Sciences, but it's really asking a lot of questions. You got to kind of put your neck out a little bit if you don't, feel safe and secure. But just talking with people, I would say, is a great way to start, which may seem a little bit like a lukewarm answer. But if you want to email me, I'm happy to chat more about it.
Thank you. Looks like we have another question. And this is the attendee just got hired to, lead the DEI initiative at a science academy, in an academy that has had no DEI historically. And the budget they have is a small $1,000. We've talked about the budgetary limitations of DEI initiatives in both of your talks. So what are the suggestions on how to implement steps to, take forward this initiative?
Can I answer this one first?
Absolutely.
It's a mistake that I've seen a lot of groups make is to just jump right into solving the problem without first defining the problem. It's really important to talk to people who are present at that academy or whatever the institution is, or people who left, and figure out what exactly are the issues, what exactly needs to be resolved. Diversity is not one thing, inclusion is not one thing. And it may be that for whatever reason, your group is excellent at something, well, problematic at something else. And devoting all your resources towards the first thing that you've heard of is something that I see a lot of groups make. For example, the Elasma Bank Society, we have major problems with a lot of things, but we have 64% women membership. So maybe recruiting early career women is not something we need to be focusing on. We seem to be doing that okay. But there are lots of other issues that we have. So step one, I would say, is make sure to carefully define the problem and make sure that you talk to not only the people who are there, but the people who left because there was a problem.
And I will jump on the back of that and say, you know, the $1,000 a month, in order to define what the problem is, you can use that $1,000 to create and implement a climate survey, you know, find out really where the issues are, where the gaps are. We work with a professional company, and with $1,000 a month, you can you know, plan 1 month, you can write the questions, you can implement, you can interpret. So I think that is always the best place to start. What is the state of the academy where you are?
Yeah, I think it comes down to identifying what needs to be done in order to, you know, improve diversity and equity in your societies. So I'd like to invite you both for any final parting thoughts before we close the discussion. Anything you'd like to add? We can start with David.
Just to say that this is an ongoing challenge. It has been a problem for a really, really, really long time. The reason that some people report that they're hearing about it all of a sudden is not because it's a new problem. It's going to take a lot of work to fix it. It's important to start doing the work. It's important to help however you can. It's important to listen more than you talk, especially if you're a white guy like me who's interested in this. I say as I just talked on behalf of my team, but they asked me to, I promise. The other important thing is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There's been a lot of great work done by a lot of groups, and most of them are happy to help. Some of them are not happy to help for free, which is reasonable to pay people for their expertise, but you don't need to guess what the solutions are here. There's a lot of great work that's already been done. Thanks for listening.
Margaret?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, one of the biggest pushbacks that we've gotten in the earth and space sciences community, and I think in all of STEM, is, you know, science is pure. It's a meritocracy. What? So meritocracy is a myth. Pure science, no, it's always influenced by what's going on in the world, politics, economy. You cannot separate people from science. And so, you know, whenever I do my work, which is all the time, it's my job, instead of doing DEI, I think DEI is how you do it. It needs to be a part of everything. It can't be a separate thing. You know, oh, I'm gonna, you know, work on my science. Oh, and then I'm gonna do DEI. It needs to all be together. Putting it all together, that, you know, that's the next step, but at least being in that frame of mind.
Thank you the both of you. For our audience, you can still ask questions in the Q&A box, and I would encourage our panelists to, you know, type in answers if anything pops up. Yeah, and I'm glad that we got to hear from David and Margaret, who are leading unique DEI initiatives at their respective societies. With that, I'd like to hand over the mic to Annabelle and Melissa, who will talk about upcoming workshops and other NSPN initiatives.
Great. Well, thank you all. Annabelle just put a link to some slides in the chat. Really great to have you all here today for this discussion. Annabelle is going to talk about the second part of the discussion, but I just wanted to remind you that if you are interested in learning more about advocacy tools to advance DEI, but also more generally, UCS and the Science Network can be a home for you. So please check out the Science Network, especially on social media. We celebrate Early Career Scientist Month in September. So check out our Twitter at SciNetUCS for a lot of early career focused content coming up next month, including the launch of our mini grants program to support your policy and advocacy efforts into the fall and winter.
Thanks, Melissa. I'll also give a plug to the National Science Policy Network. And then, of course, my home within the network, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I am no longer the committee chair, but I encourage you to contact Thomas Burnett, who is now the newly elected committee chair at DEI. At scipolnetwork.org if you want to get engaged. The committee and I think the network understands where early career scientists and engineers and researchers may not necessarily feel like they have a voice in their professional societies, but they can do so together, and it's a community that you can be built within NSPN. So there's a variety of ways to contact us via social media. You can check out the website scipolnetwork.org for more information. But the more important thing that I think is valuable for you all, as you notice in the registration, there is a part 2 to this conversation. And that is our workshop on power mapping and providing an advocacy framework for you all in advancing DEI in whatever way you choose and how big or small that effort is. And what we're hoping to do in that workshop, that's 3 weeks from now. So in 21 days at the same time, we're hoping to provide you some tools and a framework to engage in that action and advocacy. We also hope to build a little bit of community as well. So if you're having more questions post that workshop time, there is an optional additional 30 minutes afterwards where you can continue that work and continue building community around these efforts. With that, I think I will just thank everyone for being here and putting your time forward. Be on the lookout for more engagement. And if you think there are others you want to bring into this space, they can attend the workshop without having been in this session, as we will have the recording available on the National Science Policy Network's YouTube channel very shortly, as well as all of the information sort of available for you. So thank you so much, everyone. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their week.